This is Mr. Beck Does Your Homework. This is physics homework number 8, question number 11. It says, a worker on the roof of a house drops his 0.26 kilogram hammer, which slides down the roof at a constant speed of 5.01 meters per second. The roof makes an angle of 18 degrees with the horizontal, so there's my ... and its lowest point is 16.8 meters from the ground. What is the horizontal distance traveled by the hammer from the time it leaves the roof to the time it hits the ground? The acceleration due to gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. Complicated problem where you're going to have to do a number of steps in order to get to that final answer. There's another tricky part of this where this initial velocity, you'll notice it's not just to the right, it's also down. So since it's down and to the right, my initial vertical velocity, when I find the component here, is going to be negative. So let's look at X world. And let's look at Y world. In the Y world, I know that my acceleration is my acceleration is negative. Let me erase that. In the Y world, my acceleration is negative 9.8 meters per second squared. In the Y world, I know that my displacement will be 16.8 meters down, so it's going to be negative 16.8 meters. In the X world, I know that my acceleration is 0. I'm looking for my X here, so I can write X equals question mark. The other thing I know is this 18 degrees and this 5.01, that makes a right triangle, where this is my velocity in the X direction, and this is my velocity in the Y direction. Notice it's pointing down. So my velocity in the Y direction is going to be my total velocity times the sine of 18, and my velocity in the X direction is going to be my total velocity times the cosine of 18. But I know that X is positive and Y is going to be negative. So in the X world, I've got my velocity is going to be 5.01 times the cosine of 18. That I'm just going to leave positive. But in the Y world, my velocity, my initial velocity, is going to be negative of 5.01 sine 18. I know it's negative because this arrow is pointing down, and that 18 degrees doesn't tell me that, but if I see it, I say, oh, that's down, that's going to be a negative answer. So I've got to make sure that my initial velocity is negative. Now, in order to find this distance, I'm going to need a time. I don't know the time from the X world, so I need to find the time in the Y world. I might be tempted to do my distance is my initial velocity times time plus 1/2 my acceleration times time squared, and I'm free to do that, but that will give me a quadratic formula, so I'm not a big fan of doing the quadratic. So instead, I'm going to solve for my final velocity, and then I'm going to go ahead and figure out the time from that. So to get my final velocity, I know that my final velocity squared is my initial velocity squared plus twice my acceleration times my displacement. So my final velocity squared is going to be my initial velocity squared. Well, my initial velocity is this, so I'm just going to write v0 squared again, plus twice my gravity is negative 9.8, and my y is my height here is going to be negative 16.8. So this is negative and negative, that'll be a positive, twice that'll still be positive, this is positive, so this is going to be a big number, this is going to be more, it's all going to add together, and I'm going to square root, and I'll get my final velocity. Now wait a second, that final velocity, is that positive or negative? Well, think about it, this thing's falling down, 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 so this also I have to recognize, when I square root it could be negative or positive, I'm going to want the negative version of that. So now that I've got a final velocity, now can I get time? Sure I can. I can get time because I know that my final velocity is my initial velocity plus my acceleration times time. So this is my final velocity, which is negative something, right? My initial velocity is negative something plus my gravity is negative 9.8, and now I can solve for my time, right? So I know this, and I know 9.8. So now I can work out my time. Once I know my time, which I can solve from this, then I can bring that time and bring that over into the X world. And now that I've got a time, I know that with my velocity and my time, I can get my distance. because my displacement is simply my velocity times my time. So this is my x velocity, 5.01 cosine 18, goes into my velocity, and my time I brought from here. Now, a couple places you could make mistakes here, watching out for negatives and positives. This is negative and this is negative, so that makes this a big number and this another big number, so this is going to be even bigger, square rooted, but you got to throw a negative in there so that that works over here. So this will be a negative number, my initial velocity was a negative number, my acceleration is a negative number. So keep track of all that, and you should get the right time, which we'll plug in here.